'Tis the time of year where we are seeing lots of cases of coccidia in the chicken yard and the brooder. So let's talk about the two most popular treatments for coccidia and also why I choose to use unmedicated, not medicated chick starter crumbles. Coccidia is a protozoan parasite that is generally pretty naturally occurring in the gastrointestinal tract of baby animals in general. I've dealt with coccidia in my chickens, I've dealt with it in puppies. Ooh, sorry, I didn't mean to flip you off there. Dealt with it in goats, and I've dealt with it in kittens. So it's a very naturally occurring parasite. Hopefully what happens in our baby animals is they are exposed to smaller amounts of the parasite, and because what happens is when they defecate, they leave traces of the parasite or its eggs in the soil, and that's how it continues to reinfect. So hopefully what happens is over the course of their life, the baby chicks get introduced to small amounts of the parasite so that they're able to build up natural immunities to it. In the event that they are overloaded for whatever reason, whether it's in the brooder or once they hit the soil, we see negative consequences such as blood and stool, hunched over, puffed up chicks. I call it in like a vulture stance, being off food and water, huddling to themselves. They just look sick. Usually if I see a chick who just looks sick, who's under the age of about 12 to 16 weeks, coccidia is always my number one guess for what could, it's not the only thing that could happen, but it is pretty common, and it's usually my first thought of what could be going on. Fecal float tests could be done to prove that that's what we're dealing with, but here's the thing: without treatment, coccidia, once we're noticing symptoms, and especially once there's blood and stool, is very deadly. Sometimes, in the worst case scenario, we start to lose them before we even notice the symptoms, and that's awful. In any case, two medications that are used very commonly to treat for coccidia are Corid and toltrazuril products. Toltrazuril products include things such as there is actually a liquid form of toltrazuril, Endocox, and there is Baytril. The difference in these products has to do with dosaging, and I believe that whatever else is mixed in to create the powders or to create the liquids. And their egg withdrawal times reflect that. So if you're going to use Endocox products, do some research on the product and the egg withdrawal times so that you can do what you're comfortable with for your flock. But I will say, in my experience over the past 2 years, toltrazuril products, Endocox has been the most effective. Corid has no longer been working for me. Corid used to work, but I don't know if we're dealing with a new strains of coccidia or if my birds have gotten used to Corid, but I haven't treated for years. Before last year, it had been a couple years before I even had to treat for coccidia on my soil. So I really believe that something different is going around. Anyways, the Endocox, the toltrazuril products, work by attacking the coccidia directly. They work within about 3 days. They're very safe to use on the bird. I personally have never seen any negative consequences in my birds after using toltrazuril products. I've only seen the birds begin to improve literally after the first day. I've never had to do this, but I've also seen some people who will give that medication mixed up or diluted straight into the mouth in a couple drops on birds who are really terrible off. There is instructions on the packaging of whichever medication you As far as egg withdrawal times, it's going to vary depending on the medication, the brand that you use. Personally though, I'm always treating birds that are going to be intended for potential breeding programs. I don't sell birds, and the birds who I'm treating are so months before laying, so I've never really been concerned about egg withdrawal times at all. In my opinion, if my bird is going to die if I don't treat with something, I'd rather just treat and help them live, and I'll figure the rest out later. The other most commonly used product is Corid. The active ingredient in Corid is called amprolium, and amprolium works by starving the parasite of B vitamins and thiamine. Corid is typically a 7 to 14 day treatment with a higher dosage for the first 7 days and a lower dosage for the next 5 to 7 days. It's important that you finish out the complete course of treatments, kind of like antibiotics in humans, where you want to finish out the whole course to make sure that that medication is really doing its job. As far as I know, there is no egg withdrawal time on Corid, so this brings me around to medicated feed. The active ingredient in medicated feed for baby chicks is amprolium. It's the same active ingredient as in Corid. So if you were treating with Corid, you would want to make sure that if you're treating with anything, I would say make sure that take them off medicated feed if they've been taking medicated feed. But the reason I personally opt not to choose medicated feed, I prefer to treat on a symptomatic basis, or sometimes if I'm moving birds out into this time of year when it's hot and it's humid, coccidia thrives in the heat and the humidity, I will usually do a preventative dosage of Endocox, where I'll leave the birds on the soil coccidia for a couple days, and then I'll do a 1 to 3 day treatment of endocox just to protect them from an overload of coccidia before I start to see symptoms. But I imagine that if that amprolium is starving the parasite of B vitamins and thiamine, it's also starving the chick of those vitamins, and it freaks me out to use a medicated feed that's going to potentially inhibit the intake of vitamins to my birds in the ages where they need like vitamins to grow and develop. That makes me very uncomfortable. Also, I have not heard enough evidence that medicated feed actually prevents coccidia and is helpful 100% of the time. In fact, I've heard many scenarios where birds who are being treated with medicated feed still get coccidia. So I'm just not convinced that it's effective enough to be worth my perceived risk. There are people who swear by it, who have always used medicated feed, and they believe that's just the way to do it. And I absolutely support every one of our rights to do whatever works best on our farm. But it's a question I get asked a lot by new chicken keepers, whether or not I choose to use medicated feed, and I do not, and that is why. But I am prepared to treat for coccidia if I ever do see symptoms, because it is something that's so common. So anyways, if you are experiencing or have experienced losses due to coccidia, I'm so sorry. You're not a terrible chicken keeper. This happens to the best of us. I lost so many birds last year to coccidia before I was able to get a handle on it, and that was while I was still using Corid before I was introduced to endocox, and it was really terrible. Some years are worse than others. It's just kind of the name of the game in the chicken keeping business. As always, I hope this helps.